In 1985, the Shaw family vanished from their own home, their car still in the driveway. The police called it an abandonment. For 9 years, the house held a secret so terrible, no one ever thought to look behind the walls. Then, a new owner heard a sound that should have been impossible. Before I begin, thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? It really means a lot to know you're here with us. We're in this together. Now, let me tell you what really happened. The argument had been simmering for weeks, a low, toxic heat beneath the surface of the otherwise happy Shaw household. It came to a head on a bright Saturday afternoon in the spring of 1985. The subject, as it always was Denise Shaw's older brother, Franklin Foster. He stood in their living room, a tall, imposing man whose presence seemed to suck the very light from the room. His concern for his sister and her family had long ago curdled into a suffocating, obsessive control. "The world is a dangerous place, Denise," Franklin said, his voice a low, insistent rumble. "Especially for our people. You're too trusting. Curtis is too soft. The children, they need to be protected. Truly protected." Curtis Shaw, a high school music teacher whose gentle demeanor was often mistaken for weakness, stood his ground. At 36, he was a man who believed in the good of his community, in the power of music and faith. "My family is safe here, Franklin," he said, his voice firm. "We don't need you telling us how to live our lives. We need you to give us space." Denise, caught between the two men, wrung her hands. She loved her brother, but his paranoia, his dark view of the world, had become a suffocating presence. Their children, 12-year-old Jerome and 8-year-old Vanessa, had grown quiet, retreating to their rooms whenever their uncle visited. The argument escalated. Franklin's vision of protection was becoming more extreme, his pronouncements more chilling. He spoke of building a sanctuary, a place where no harm could ever reach them, a place where he could watch over them. The argument ended when Curtis, his patience finally snapping, ordered Franklin out of his house and told him not to return until he could respect their boundaries. Franklin had left, but not before giving Denise a look of profound, sorrowful disappointment, as if she were a fool choosing to walk willingly into a fire. "You'll see," he'd whispered. "You'll all see. One day you'll thank me." That was the last time anyone outside the immediate family saw them. The following week, the silence from the Shaw house began. Mail, usually collected daily by Denise, started to pile up in their mailbox. Newspapers, delivered with a familiar thud each morning, lay untouched on the front porch. Curtis missed a scheduled practice for the high school jazz band without calling. Denise missed her volunteer shift at the local library. Jerome and Vanessa did not show up for school on Monday morning. It was a concerned neighbor who finally called the police. She had knocked on the door several times, peered through the windows, and seen nothing but a house that seemed frozen in time. The family's car, a respectable sedan, was still parked in the driveway. When the police arrived, they found the house locked, with no signs of forced entry. After gaining access, they found a scene of eerie, ordinary stillness. A half-finished game of checkers sat on the living room floor. Dishes were in the drying rack by the kitchen sink. The beds were made. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no note, no indication of a hurried departure. It was as if the Shaw family of four had simply evaporated into thin air. The investigation began, and its first point of contact was the only close relative in town, Franklin Foster. He arrived at the scene projecting an air of grave, brotherly concern. He spoke to the lead detective, a jaded white officer named Wallace Grimes, painting a subtle, poisonous picture. He spoke of Curtis and Denise having terrible marital problems, of Curtis having a wandering eye, of Denise being unhappy and unstable. He hinted that they'd often talked about packing up and starting a new life somewhere else, maybe on the West Coast, to escape their troubles. For Detective Grimes, a man already inclined to view cases from the city's black neighborhoods through a lens of cynical stereotypes, Franklin's story was a convenient gift. It fit a neat, simple narrative that required minimal effort. "It happens all the time," Grimes later told a junior officer. "They fight, They get tired of the bills, they just pack a bag and leave the mess behind. Family tells us a different story, but it's always the same. The official search was therefore superficial. They put out a standard missing persons bulletin, but the case lacked urgency. With a cooperative family member suggesting they left voluntarily, and with no evidence of foul play, the police quickly downgraded the investigation. The strange disappearance of the Shaw family became a story of abandonment, of irresponsibility. The systemic indifference was palpable. A black family's disappearance was treated not as a crime to be solved, but as a domestic issue to be filed away. The mystery was solved, not by finding the truth, but by inventing a convenient lie. And as the house on the quiet street began its long, slow descent into neglect, Franklin Foster would sometimes be seen standing across the street, just watching, his face a mask of unreadable emotion. The house where the Shaw family had once lived became a monument to their silence. For the first year, it stood as a question mark on the block, its lawns slowly growing shaggy, its windows gathering a film of dust. Neighbors would glance at it, a flicker of unease in their eyes, before hurrying on. The police, when called by concerned residents about the state of the property, would simply refer them to the bank, stating that the owners had abandoned the mortgage. The official narrative had taken root. The Shaws were not victims. They were irresponsible. They had walked away from their lives, their home, their community. The bank eventually foreclosed on the property. The legal notices taped to the front door a final, bureaucratic epitaph for a family that had, for all intents and purposes, been officially erased. The house, now bank-owned, sat empty, a ghost on an otherwise lively street. It became a local curiosity, then a blight. The paint peeled, the porch sagged, and the yard surrendered to a tangle of weeds and creeping ivy. Teenagers dared each other to spend a night on its porch, swapping ghost stories about the family who had simply vanished. Franklin Foster, Denise Shaw's estranged brother, remained in the background, a shadowy figure. He lived just a few miles away, in a small, meticulously neat house of his own. He never moved. He was seen, from time to time, driving slowly past the old Shaw house, his gaze lingering on the decaying structure, his expression unreadable. To the few who remembered his connection to the family, his quiet vigil seemed like that of a grieving relative. No one could have guessed it was the watchfulness of a zookeeper checking on the silent, hidden cage he had so carefully constructed. In order to deter any official inspections from the bank or the city during the foreclosure process, he had subtly contributed to the house's decay, ensuring it appeared structurally unsound from the outside by breaking a few key supports in the crawl space and allowing water damage to appear in visible places, making any inspector hesitant to venture too deep into the decaying home. Inside that cage, time moved differently. The 9 years that passed in the outside world, a blur of changing seasons, political shifts, new music, and evolving technology, were for the Shaw family an unending, monotonous twilight. Their world had shrunk to the dimensions of a small, windowless, soundproofed room that Franklin had secretly, obsessively built in the basement of their own home years before, a sanctuary, he had called it. The night he trapped them was a blur of confusion and terror. He had come to them with a fabricated story of a chemical spill in the neighborhood, a toxic cloud, insisting he was there to lead them to a safe place he had prepared for just such an emergency. In the chaos and panic, he had herded them into the hidden room. The heavy, soundproof door had swung shut behind them, the click of the heavy deadbolt locking them not just into a room, but out of the world. Their lives became a bleak routine governed by his control. Food and water appeared through a small, locked slot in the door at irregular intervals. A single, bare bulb, controlled from the outside, provided their only light. A primitive toilet in the corner offered the only sanitation. They had no news of the outside world, only the stories Franklin would tell them through a small grate in the door. He told them a terrible chemical war had begun, that the air outside was poison, that he was their savior, the only one keeping them safe from a world that had ended. Curtis, the gentle music teacher, tried to keep their spirits up, organizing their days with lessons for the children, storytelling, and singing hymns in hushed voices. Denise, the practical librarian, rationed their food and tended to their needs with a fierce, protective love. But as months turned into years, despair began to erode their hope. The children, Jerome and Vanessa, grew up in this dim, concrete womb, their knowledge of the sun, the sky, the feel of grass beneath their feet, fading into a distant, dreamlike memory. The crazy crime was not one of violence, but of a slow, relentless psychological dismantling, a theft of time, of life, of reality itself. In the autumn of 1994, 9 years after the Shaw family vanished, Regina Bailey, a determined 30-year-old single mother, was looking for a fresh start. She worked as a medical transcriptionist, a job that allowed her to support herself and her young son. But her small apartment felt cramped, temporary. She dreamed of a home, a place with a yard, a place to put down roots. She found the old Shaw house listed in a foreclosure auction. It was a wreck, the listing admitted, in need of significant repairs. But it was a house, and the price was a fraction of anything else on the market. It was a chance she felt she had to take. She won the auction, her heart filled with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She knew nothing of its tragic history, only that it was a forgotten house waiting for someone to bring it back to life. As she signed the papers and received the old, tarnished keys, she felt a surge of hope. This would be their home, their sanctuary. She had no way of knowing that she was about to step into a 9-year-old nightmare, or that the house she had just bought was already, terrifyingly, occupied. Regina Bailey's first few weeks in the old Shaw house were a whirlwind of determined labor. She attacked the years of neglect with a zeal born from the dream of creating a true home for herself and her young son. She tore up stained carpets, scraped peeling paint, and battled the overgrown jungle that was once a backyard. The house, she knew, had good bones. It just needed love and a lot of hard work. But as she spent more time within its walls, especially during the quiet hours after her son was asleep, she began to notice things. Small, unsettling things that pricked at the edges of her sense of security. It started with the sounds. Old houses creak and groan, she told herself. It was just the structure settling, the pipes contracting in the cool autumn nights. But the sounds she heard were different. They weren't the random groans of old wood. They were rhythmic, almost patterned, a soft, faint tapping that seemed to come from deep within the basement walls, a sound she could only hear when the house was completely silent. She would freeze, her heart fluttering, straining to listen, only for the sound to stop, leaving her to wonder if she had imagined it. Then there was the cold. There was a specific spot along the main wall in the basement, a section of concrete block that seemed out of place, its mortar a slightly different color from the rest of the foundation. This spot was always cold to the touch, a deep, unnatural chill that seemed to radiate from the stone, even on warmer days. Her son, playing down there once, had complained about his cold spot and refused to go near it again. Regina had dismissed it as a draft, a quirk of an old, poorly insulated foundation. The mystery deepened. She noticed faint, almost imperceptible drafts that seemed to have no source. Sometimes late at night, she would hear what sounded like a muffled cry, a thin, wailing sound that was so faint it could have been the wind whistling through a loose window frame, or a cat in a neighbor's yard. But it always seemed to emanate from the same direction, the basement. She tried to rationalize it all away. She was a single mother in a new, big, spooky old house. She was tired, overworked, her imagination playing tricks on her. She told herself she was just being paranoid. But the feeling of unease grew, a constant, low-grade hum of wrongness that she couldn't shake. The house didn't feel haunted by ghosts. It felt occupied. It felt like it was holding its breath, keeping a secret. The turning point, the moment that shattered her rationalizations and plunged her into a terrifying new reality, came on a Tuesday night in late October. It was Vanessa Shaw's 17th birthday, a milestone she should have been celebrating with friends and family. Instead, she was marking it, as she had for 9 years, in the dim, concrete silence of her prison. In a small act of desperate remembrance, A ritual to mark the passage of a life she couldn't live. She began to sing. Upstairs, Regina Bailey was getting ready for bed. Her son was asleep, the house silent. And then she heard it. It was not a tap, not a creak, not the wind. It was a voice. A girl's voice, thin and weak, so muffled it was almost subliminal, filtering up through the floorboards from the basement below. Regina froze, her heart seizing in her chest. She strained to listen, her entire body rigid. The voice was singing. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. The sound was faint, distorted, impossibly sad, but it was unmistakably a human voice singing a child's song. It was a sound that should not exist in her empty house. Terror, pure and absolute, washed over Regina. Every ghost story, every horror movie she had ever seen, paled in comparison to this real, tangible, and inexplicable horror. Her house was not just haunted. There was someone in her walls. She backed away from the basement door, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. Her first instinct was to grab her son and run, to flee into the night and never look back. But then another thought, even more terrifying, took hold. What if they were trapped? What if they needed help? Her hands trembling so violently she could barely hold her phone, she locked herself and her sleeping son in her bedroom and dialed 911. Her voice, when she spoke to the dispatcher, was a choked, terrified whisper. There's someone in my house, she managed to say. I think they're trapped inside the basement wall. The dispatcher, accustomed to strange calls, was initially skeptical. But the raw, genuine terror in Regina's voice was undeniable. Ma'am, stay on the line. We're sending a unit right now. Regina sat on her bed, clutching her son, her eyes fixed on the locked bedroom door, listening to the impossible, heartbreaking sound of a girl faintly singing happy birthday to herself in the cold, dark depths of the house. The whispers in the wall had finally been heard. The arrival of the police cruiser, its flashing blue and red lights, painting the quiet street in surreal, frantic strokes, was both a terror and a profound relief for Regina Bailey. She met the two uniformed officers at her front door, her voice trembling as she recounted the impossible story of the voice in the wall. The officers exchanged a look of weary skepticism. A house settling, a radio left on in a neighbor's basement, an overactive imagination. They had heard all before. They did a standard walkthrough of the house, their heavy flashlights cutting through the familiar spaces of Regina's new life, now rendered alien and menacing by her fear. They found nothing out of the ordinary. In the basement, the faint sounds had ceased. The cold spot on the wall was just a cold spot. The officers were polite, but dismissive. Ma'am, one of them said, we can't go breaking down your walls based on a feeling. If you hear it again, give us a call. But Regina was resolute. It wasn't a feeling, she insisted, her voice gaining a desperate strength. It was a girl, singing. I know what I heard. Her fierce conviction, her refusal to be placated, must have struck a chord. The officers called in their supervisor, who in turn, after hearing the bizarre story, made the decision to contact the on-call detective. That detective was Michelle Grant. Detective Grant was a woman in her early 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a reputation for taking the strange and the forgotten seriously. When she arrived at Regina's house after midnight and heard the story, she didn't dismiss it. She listened intently, her gaze traveling to the anomalous section of the basement wall that Regina pointed out, the place with the slightly different mortar, the unnatural chill. You have the original blueprints? Detective Grant asked. Regina, having found them in the attic during her initial clean-out, produced them. Grant spread the old, brittle paper on the floor. The plans showed a solid, uninterrupted foundation wall. There was no room, no hidden space, no compartment. The wall in front of them was a lie. That was enough. For Detective Grant, a structural anomaly combined with a credible, terrified witness report was grounds for action. Get a sledgehammer from the trunk, she ordered one of the uniformed officers. The decision to break through the wall was a moment of profound tension. Regina stood back with her son, her arms wrapped tightly around him. The first blow from the sledgehammer against the concrete block was deafening, a brutal, shocking sound in the quiet house. The second blow sent spiderweb cracks across the surface. The third and the fourth. Finally, with a fifth, powerful strike, a section of the block crumbled inwards, revealing not earthen foundation, but a dark, hollow void beyond. A wave of foul, stagnant air, the smell of unwashed bodies, human waste, and profound despair, washed out of the opening. It was a smell so overwhelming that one of the officers recoiled, gagging. Detective Grant, her face a mask of grim determination, shone her powerful flashlight into the hole. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a scene from a nightmare. In the cramped, hidden space, for figures huddled together on a collection of filthy mattresses. They were emaciated, their skin unnaturally pale, their eyes wide and blinking against the sudden, shocking intrusion of light. A man, a woman, and two children, or rather, what had once been children, now a young man and a teenage girl, their growth stunted, their bodies frail. It was the Shaw family. They stared out, not with relief, but with a deep, conditioned terror. The young woman, Vanessa, let out a small, terrified whimper. Her brother, Jerome, moved instinctively in front of his mother. "It's okay," Detective Grant said, her voice surprisingly gentle, keeping her flashlight beam aimed at the floor to avoid blinding them. "We're the police. We're here to help you. You're safe now." The rescue was a slow, delicate operation. Paramedics were called, their arrival turning the quiet street into a major incident scene. The family was coaxed out of their prison one by one, wrapped in blankets, their eyes shielded against a world they had not seen in 9 years. They were ghosts, blinking in the harsh, unfamiliar light of freedom, their bodies and minds warped by a captivity that was almost impossible to comprehend. As the Shaw family was being carefully led to waiting ambulances, the investigation inside their 9-year tomb began. It was a place of unimaginable horror. A single bare bulb provided light. A primitive toilet and a small sink in the corner. Shelves with a meager supply of canned goods and bottled water. And nothing else. No books, no toys, no windows, no connection to the outside world. This had been their entire existence for nearly a decade. The discovery sent shockwaves through the police department and the city. The cold case of the runaway Shaw family was now an active, horrifying kidnapping and false imprisonment investigation. Detective Grant knew this was just the beginning. The next step was to find the monster who had built this cage, the man who had held them there for 9 years, their sole captor, their only link to a world they were told had ceased to exist. And she had a very strong suspicion she knew exactly where to start looking. With Denise Shaw's concerned, estranged older brother, Franklin Foster. The rescue of the Shaw family from the hidden tomb in their own basement ignited a media firestorm and a police investigation of an intensity that stood in stark, shameful contrast to the apathy of 1985. Detective Michelle Grant, now leading a full-blown task force, focused her attention with singular purpose on one man, Franklin Foster. Franklin, now in his early 50s, was living a quiet, unassuming life just a few miles away. When detectives arrived at his meticulously neat home, he met them with an air of calm, almost pious concern. "My sister, Denise? They've been found?" he asked, his performance of surprised relief flawless. But when Detective Grant informed him they had been found alive, in a secret room in their own house, a flicker of something, not joy, but a cold, possessive fury, flashed in his eyes before he could mask it. His denials were absolute, but the evidence, once the investigation knew where to look, was overwhelming. The hidden room had been constructed with a level of obsessive detail that pointed to a skilled craftsman, and Franklin was known to be a gifted amateur carpenter. The supplies for its construction were traced back to purchases he had made in the early 1980s. And the lie he had told Detective Grimes in 1985, that the Shaws had marital problems and planned to run away, was now exposed not as a concerned relative speculation, but as a deliberate act of misdirection, a crucial part of his monstrous plan. The full, horrifying story was pieced together from the slow, painful testimony of the rescued Shaw family, particularly from Curtis and Denise, as they began their long, arduous journey of recovery in a specialized medical facility. The crazy crime was one of twisted, obsessive control. Franklin Foster, consumed by a paranoid belief that the world was too dangerous for his sister and her family, had decided to save them by creating his own perfect, controlled environment. He had built this soundproofed room in their basement over the course of 2 years, under the guise of helping them with a renovation. The night he trapped them, he had used a fabricated story of a chemical spill, a neighborhood-wide emergency, herding them into his sanctuary for their own protection. For 9 years, he had been their sole link to the outside world, their god and their jailer. He provided them with basic sustenance, just enough to survive, all while psychologically tormenting them with a meticulously crafted lie. The world outside had ended in a chemical war, and he was their savior, the only one keeping them safe. He controlled their light, their food, their very perception of reality. The Shaw children, Jerome and Vanessa, had grown from a 12 and 8-year-old into a 21 and 17-year-old in that dim, concrete womb. Their knowledge of the sun, of seasons, of other people, had faded into a dream. It was Vanessa's quiet, desperate act of singing "Happy Birthday" to herself on the night of her 17th birthday, a fragile assertion of her own existence, that had finally, miraculously, penetrated the soundproofed walls and reached Regina Bailey. Franklin Foster was arrested. At his trial, he was unrepentant. His testimony, a chilling look into a mind warped by paranoia and a monstrous sense of ownership. He truly believed he had been saving his family, not imprisoning them. He was found guilty and sentenced to spend the rest of his life in a facility for the criminally insane, his own kind of locked room. For the Shaw family, the aftermath was a new kind of struggle. They were free, but they were profoundly damaged. The world of 1994 was an overwhelming, terrifying place of strange technologies, new music, and different social norms. They had to learn how to live again, how to trust, how to walk under an open sky without fear. Their physical recovery was slow, their psychological recovery a journey that would last a lifetime. The year following the rescue was a difficult, fragile time for the Shaw family. They lived in a secure, undisclosed location, shielded from the media frenzy that had erupted around their case, a story the world found both horrifying and fascinating. Their days were a structured routine of therapy, medical checkups, and the slow, painstaking process of reacclimating to a world that had moved on for 9 years without them. For Jerome, now 21 but with the social understanding of a 12-year-old, the world was a cacophony of overwhelming stimuli. Cars were too fast, stores were too bright. The sheer number of people on a single street was a source of constant anxiety. He found solace in books, just as his mother had in their captivity, devouring tales of science and astronomy. The logical order of the cosmos, a comforting counterpoint to the chaos of his own life. For Vanessa, now 17, the experience was different. She had celebrated 9 birthdays in the dark, her only candles the dim glow of a bare light bulb. Her re-entry into the world was marked by a quiet, fierce determination. She embraced the colors, the sounds, the fashions of 1995 with a hungry curiosity. She discovered music that wasn't just the hymns her father had taught them. She sketched obsessively, filling notebooks with images of the sun, of trees, of faces, the things she had been denied. But at night, the nightmares came, the memory of the concrete walls, the metallic taste of canned food, the sound of Franklin's voice through the grate. Curtis and Denise, the parents, focused all their energy on their children's healing, even as they grappled with their own profound trauma. They had to learn to be a family again in the light. They had to navigate a world where their own brother, their own flesh and blood, had been revealed as their monstrous jailer. The injustice of the original 1985 police investigation, the casual racism of Detective Grimes that had allowed Franklin's lie to take root, was a bitter pill. Detective Michelle Grant had personally apologized to them on behalf of the department, a small but significant gesture of a new era. Regina Bailey, the woman who had heard the whispers in the wall, remained a crucial part of their new lives. She became their first friend in this new world, their advocate, their guide. She brought them takeout food, helped Vanessa pick out new clothes, and simply sat with them in comfortable silence, a steady presence who understood the horrors their house had held. Her act of courage, of refusing to dismiss the impossible, had given them back their lives. The story ends on a quiet, poignant note a year after their rescue. It is Vanessa's 18th birthday. There is no singing in a dark room this time. The Shaw family, along with Regina and her son, are in a sunlit public park. There's a small cake on a picnic blanket, its candles flickering in the gentle breeze. Jerome is pointing out constellations in a book to Regina's son. Curtis and Denise are sitting on a bench, holding hands, their faces turned towards the warmth of the sun. Vanessa sits on the grass, her sketchbook open. She is not drawing monsters or dark rooms. She is sketching the scene before her, her family together in the open air, surrounded by the vibrant, chaotic, beautiful world. Her drawing is not perfect, the lines still a little hesitant, but is filled with light. She looks up and catches her mother's eye. Denise offers a small, fragile, but genuine smile. In that shared glance, a universe of pain, survival, and enduring love is communicated. Their healing would be the work of a lifetime. The 9 stolen years could never be returned. But in this small, ordinary moment, a birthday cake in a park, the warmth of the sun on their faces, was a quiet, profound victory. They were free. They were together. And for the first time in a very long time, they were facing the future, not as prisoners of a dark past, but as survivors scarred but whole, ready to learn how to live again.